Hello and welcome to the Forth Valley West of Scotland Regional Improvement Collaborative Study Support Resource for National 5 Business Management. So our learning intentions for this lesson is to consolidate and support study skills for National 5 Business Management and to understand how to answer the command words correctly. Our success criteria for today's lesson is that I can apply the correct command words for business management. I can apply good structure to my answers, and I know the common mistakes made in the exam. So during the lesson, you will see a number of these symbols, and they indicate what you should do. So you might see these pop up from time to time. Now, first things first, before you even contemplate going into the exam, to give you a top tip, I would give the following equipment. So in addition to your pens, it may be useful to bring the following: a highlighter for highlighting command words on the exam paper and for keywords in the case study, a ruler for the inventory control diagram and product life cycle, and a calculator for accuracy in calculations in the finance topics. So we're going to speak at the layout of the answers. It may be useful, a top tip, for you to bullet point your answers. And this does two things. One, it helps you structure your answers clearly so that you know how many points you've made, so then you can match it back to the question. And secondly, it helps the marker identify your points, so it's really clear for both parties. Now, that doesn't mean to say that because you are bullet pointing your answers, you're going to have brief answers. It just means that it's easily laid out. So here's an example. Question 1, identify 2 methods of selecting the right person for the job. That command word was identify, 2 bullet points after the question, job done. So to show you what I mean about brief answers, the next command word that you might come across would be describe. So describe the interests of stakeholders above, 2 marks, 2 bullet points. Employees are interested in getting a good rate of pay and working conditions, and shareholders are interested in getting a profit returned on their investment. It might also be useful for you to use simple dashes like we have done in question 2. That just shows you that you're going on to describe more, but more about that later. Now, assuming that everybody has done a prelim, a full prelim, the timings for the exams are 2 hours and you have 90 marks. Now for this, it may be useful for you to split up the exam paper for timings, just in your head. So section 1, questions 1 and 2, consist of 2 case study questions, and they will be mixed topics. What you'll find is that they'll have quite possibly understanding business topics mixed in with marketing, mixed in with operations. It really just depends. And those 2 questions in total are worth 40 marks. So your rough timings would be 60 minutes for section 1. So if you split up your questions 1 and question 2 into 30 minutes each, then that should provide you enough time, taking into consideration that you need to read the case study as well. So section 2, questions 3 to 7, consist of 5 10-mark topic questions, but the questions vary in length. Now, usually you might get asked up to a 5-mark question. That section is worth 50 marks. And the approximate timings again would be 60 minutes for section 2, roughly about 12 minutes each. Now, just depending on your strengths, it might be that you spend a little bit longer on each question and less on some. So I would use this as just an approximate time, so you're not running out of time at the end. Talking about timings is that you should aim to be using the full 2 hours. If you're sitting there early, it indicates that you have got more to write. And what you can always do is you can always go back and add in your answers. So the next thing we're going to look at now are the command words of business. Just a reminder that the command words direct us to how questions should be answered, and it is important that we know these well and apply good structure, because it is one of the common mistakes in the exam of not applying the command words correctly. So you might have seen this. These are the National 5 Business Management command words. And if you're looking at that and wondering, oh, I haven't come across some of them before, chances are you have. It's just maybe not been a big focus. So the command words with the green stars are all very similar. Identify, state, name, suggest, and give. We'll run over these in a minute. Outline stands alone. There's nothing really similar to outline. Complete, label, draw, calculate. They're usually associated with either the stock control diagram or the product life cycle diagram. And calculate and label are also usually associated with income statements or cash budget type questions. Describe and define are also very similar. But discuss, justify, compare, distinguish, and explain are separate in what they want you to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover the main ones today and give you some technique as to how to structure your answers. So the first command word that we're going to look at is identify. And identify just means name or pick out. So we're looking for one-word answers in this circumstance, generally speaking, or a name of something. So here's a question for you. Identify 3 external factors affecting a business. And you can see there that I've now made good use of the highlighting tool. So what I would encourage you to do is on your exam paper, take the highlighter, highlight the command word, and then also highlight something else. So we would be highlighting external factors and make sure that you have 3 points. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to pause the video, and it should take you approximately 4 minutes to complete this. So just going over the answers then. Now obviously I have got 6 answers here, but you wouldn't need to do that. You would just need to bullet point your answers like so. Political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and competitive. So the next command word is outline. And outline takes identify just that little bit further. In other words, you've got to state the main features, and this time we're expecting bigger than a list. So say, for example, you had a question that was identify 2 stakeholders in a business for 2 marks. You've bullet pointed your answers, employees and customers. But this question asks you to outline the interests of stakeholders identified above. So often an outline question is associated to the previous question. So this time I'm going to ask you to pause the video, take approximately 3 minutes to try and answer that question, which is building upon employees. So if we're talking about structure here, you would have very similar answers up here. Employees dash, customers dash, and that should help you answer it. So going over the example then, like I have before. Employees, they want a good pay. If you've got good pay, that would be fine. But to give you another example, you could have said employees want good working conditions. Customers want good value for money, or customers want good quality goods. Now you can see there that you don't need to go too much in depth, but you definitely need to make it bigger than a list. Now, if you, in this circumstance, say the question was identify and you went on to outline, you would still pick up the marks using a technique like this. However, if it was the other way around and you were asked to outline the interests of stakeholders and you just gave a list like employees and customers, you wouldn't get the mark. Just when we're talking about stakeholders and the interests of stakeholders, you have to be clear on who the stakeholder is. Okay, so in this circumstance, this is just a little bit of a top tip, is that if it was outlining the interests of stakeholders, it has to be obvious as to which stakeholder you are talking about. So moving on, describe again. Describe is one step up from outline. And this time you're asked to provide a thorough description. So in general, I would aim for a sentence. And if you're struggling to put a wee bit more detail in your answers, examples can always help. You don't necessarily get a mark for an example, however, it strengthens your answer. So it strengthens your case for your point. So back to the previous question. The previous question was outline the interests of two stakeholders. And you had employees wanted good rate of pay and good working conditions. Employees wanted value for money and good quality goods. A describe question that would be very similar would be describe the interests of stakeholders above. So this time I'm going to ask you to pause the video for 3 minutes to complete the task. So welcome back. Here are your answers. Again, we've said that employees dash aim to have good working conditions such as better holidays. You can see there that I've put a detailed description and I've used an example to strengthen your answer, to make it bigger. Customers aim to have good quality goods at low prices. So sometimes it helps if you join two together. If you join the two outlines up here and join them together to make one, but in more detail. So again, if the question was describe the interests of stakeholders and you just outlined, you didn't give enough, you wouldn't get the mark. However, if you were asked to outline and you gave a description, then you always pick up what's called not always, but more often than not, you can pick up what's called a development point, and that is when you go on to make more points than is required. Next command word is discuss. And discuss means provide arguments for and against something. In other words, we're looking for you to do advantages and disadvantages, or it might be referred to as costs and benefits. Now, there's two ways that they might ask this question. They might ask you to discuss the type of something or discuss desk research. So here's an example. Discuss the type of organisation identified in the case study, in which that you've got to look at the case study, pick out the type of organisation, and then give me advantages and disadvantages. But they might be a wee bit more generous and actually tell you what discuss means. So they will say discuss the advantages and disadvantages of being a sole trader, and what that just means is that you've got to describe the advantages and disadvantages. So they may be kind to you and actually tell you what you've got to do there, or you may have to guess. But if you know your command words and can practice them, then you should be able to use that. Now, because it is 4 marks and you're asked to discuss, that means that you have to give at least 3 advantages and 1 disadvantage, or the other way around. 3 disadvantages and 1 advantage. But to keep it simple, often you can just do 2 and 2. So what I would like you to do is pause the video for approximately 5 minutes and answer the second question, which is discuss the advantages and disadvantages of being a sole trader, for 4 marks. So approximately 5 minutes. Okay, let's go over the answers then. So it may be useful for you to also bring a ruler into the exam so you can underline and make some headings. And a heading that you could make would be advantages. So here I'm also going to explain about development points. Development points is when you go on to describe or further describe or develop your answers further. So for example, advantages, the owner gets to keep all the profits to themselves. That would be 1 mark. But if you went on to say, well, why is that a good thing? It is a good thing because it gives the owner a higher return on their investment. So you would be given what's called development point. The owner gets to make all the decisions. That is good because there will be less argument and decision making will also be much quicker. Advantage, very easy to set up. That's as much as you need to do there. But if you say, well, why is that good? It's good because there's fewer legal restrictions which may delay the setup. So again, you can have a maximum of 3 advantages in your answer here. Now don't forget that you have to also describe the disadvantages. Again, the owner has unlimited liability, and that's as far as you could take that if need be. But if you went on to say that the owner runs the risk of losing their personal possessions if the organisation can't pay its debts, then that would give you a further point. Finance is limited. That's because there's only 1 of you. And that is an disadvantage because it may limit to how much an individual can invest themselves or have the ability to borrow. You could also say that it limits your ability to grow as a company. The owner has no one to share the workload with, and that can cause a lot of stress to the owner, but it also may lead to poor decisions being made. And again, you can only have a maximum of 3. Of one or the other. Okay, next one now we're going to look at justify. And justify is when you give reasons to support your answers. So I've got a little rhyme for you there. Justify, say why. And it's important you have that little rhyme because one of the common mistakes with justify is that candidates give disadvantages. But we're only looking for positive points or advantages in this circumstance. So here's a question for you. Justify the importance of good customer service. And you can see here that I've also made use of my highlighter. Highlighting the command word, so you know what to do. And highlighting the fact that you're looking at the importance. So you're not looking at a disadvantage, you're looking at a good thing. So justify the good thing about customer service. So if you pause the video for approximately 4 to 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll go over the answers. Okay, welcome back. So justify the importance of good customer service. Well, number 1, that it will ensure that customers return. 1 mark. But if you went on to give a development point of that, you could say that this will increase the sales of the company, and you would get a 2nd mark. The business will gain a good reputation. A further advantage of that would be that it will entice new customers to the business. Businesses will be able to charge higher prices. Customers will recommend to friends and family, and the business may receive less complaints from the customers. So you can see when we're looking at justify that your answer length approximately should be the same as a describe answer. If you just said justify the importance of good customer service, higher prices, that is not enough. It would need to be higher prices can be charged. Now, again, development points can be awarded here by going on to explain. So if you further explain your answers, then you can pick up development points. Okay, now we're going to look at compare. Compare is a trickier little command word. And we're looking at showing similarities and differences between two or more factors. So for example, a question would be to compare the features of a private limited company to a sole trader. So what we're looking at for you to do here is use the phrase whereas in your answers. So compare really has two parts to it. It's got a part A and it's got a part B. And you'd have to have both of them in order to get the mark, unless you are looking at something that is a similarity. So what I would like you to do this time is take about 6 minutes to do this question, because it will require you to work a wee bit harder for your answer. Okay, so a sole trader is owned by one person. That is your part A, whereas a private limited company is owned by shareholders. Now, without that, you can't get the mark. So your part A would be your sole trader, whereas this is your second part. A sole trader is run by an individual, whereas a private limited company is run by a managing director or a board of directors. So again, if you were wanting to use a highlighter, and feel free to use a highlighter on your paper or underline the keywords, and that just keeps you on track that you have got to have two parts. A sole trader makes the decisions in a business, whereas a managing director, board of directors, shareholders make decisions in a private limited company. Sole traders have unlimited liability, whereas private limited companies have limited liability. Both belong to the private sector. Now, this is the part that you don't necessarily need an A or a B, because it's a similarity in which you would use the word both. Legal documents are required on forming a private limited company, whereas a sole trader does not require any formal paperwork. So what we're really wanting you to do is do a proper comparison. So you have to have an A and a B, or if it's both, then you would just apply it that way. Now, top tip here, you really need to avoid words like doesn't, isn't, is not. So for example, what I mean by that is that you say a sole trader has unlimited liability, whereas a partnership doesn't. It's got to be a positive point. So it's got to be a piece of information that you offer there, because otherwise you won't get the mark. That's why compare questions you might want to allocate like a little bit longer to. And they tend to be approximately 2 to 3 4-mark questions. Distinguish. Distinguish is practically the same as compare, but this time you're only showing differences. So this time you have got to have your A, you've got to have your be. You cannot use both have. So it can be really confusing if the two command words come up, but you just need to be familiar with them. So here's an example, and it's an example from a case study. Babes in the Woods is in the third sector. So that was already from a case study. Distinguish between the features of two other sectors of the economy in terms of ownership, control, and finance. So again, distinguish questions might take that little bit longer because technically you're having to have 6 pieces of information. So take approximately 5 minutes to complete this. So welcome back. Let's have a look at some of the answers. And again, I've underlined the word whereas because that's the technique that you should use. And if it helps, you should use that, underline it in your exam paper. So ownership. The private sector is owned by private individuals, whereas the public sector is owned by the government. Control. Private sector is controlled by sole traders, partners, board of directors, whereas a public sector is controlled by the government, ministers or councillors. In finance, the private sector is financed by owners, capital or loans, whereas the public sector is funded by taxes. So again, 3 bullet points, but 3 compared bullet points. And again, same as compare, it has to be a positive point. So it has to be a fact that you're giving, avoiding the words isn't, doesn't. Okay, the last command word that we'll go over is explain. And explain is probably the trickier one out of all of them. And explain means give a detailed response, giving a definition and explanation as to why or how something may benefit or hinder. So in this circumstance, we're looking for a description and reasons why. So a description plus an advantage, or it could be a disadvantage depending on what you've done. Sometimes it could be describe and justify put together if you're talking about an advantage. You have to have an A and a B part. So you're looking at putting 2 parts together to give you your mark. Now here, it can be very helpful to put some key phrases into your answers to help you remember to explain. And what is useful is if you use the phrase, this is an advantage because, this will affect the business by, this means that, this is a disadvantage because. So if you get a really good structure to your explain answers, then you're sorted. Okay, let's go over an explain question. So say, for example, your question number 1 was identify 2 stakeholders in a supermarket, and you've already identified or picked out owners and shareholders and suppliers. So next question could be to explain how these stakeholders could influence the success of an organisation. You can see there that I've highlighted explain, so you know what to do, explain, and also a keyword influence. Just to remind you that it's the influence that you need to be talking about and not the interest, because those two get often mixed up. So this time, explain questions take a wee bit longer, so take about approximately 5 minutes to pause the video and complete the task. Okay, so let's have a look at the answers then. Again, we have got a list here, but it is not just listed, it's a detailed explanation. So the owners make major decisions. You can see there that I've underlined that, which is also good technique because it highlights to them that you know that we're going on to explain a bit further. So the owner can make major decisions. This can influence a business as they may make bad decisions resulting in less profit. They can vary their level of investment, which can impact on the type of decision the organisation can make, or you could have said that it could affect the growth of the company depending if they withdraw or add-on funds. Talking about suppliers then, so you do the exact same for the suppliers, and the suppliers can vary the quality of their supplies. This is a disadvantage, or which affects the quality of the final product. And again, you can see here that I've got your point, and then I've got your explanation. The suppliers can delay delivery, that's your point, and your explanation will be that it will halt production. Now again, when it comes to explain, if you go on to further explain your answers, your explained answers, then you can also pick up development points from there. Okay, now we're going to look at some more top tips so you can have success in the exam. So if you can't remember the names of things, but you can remember the concepts, then I've got a little rhyme for you. If in doubt, leave the label out. Because if you wrongly identify somebody or get the names mixed up with something, then you don't get the marks for it, unfortunately. So if you can't remember the name of something, but you can remember the concept, then just leave the label out and you'll get marks for the description or marks for the explanation. So to give you an example about that, say that you get mixed up between limited liability and unlimited liability, right? But you can describe the terms. So if you know that a sole trader may lose the personal possessions if the business fails, then just put that. Don't bother labeling it if you're unsure. Just put that description and you would get the marks for that. Because if you label it wrong, then you won't get the marks. So say if you said a sole trader has limited liability, which means that they lose their personal possessions, unfortunately you won't get credited with that. Give you another example. Say if you get mixed up with market skimming and penetration pricing, and the question asks you to describe pricing strategies. A strategy that a business could use when the product is priced at a really high price to begin with and then is lowered as sales start to fall, that would be accredited with the mark. It just happens to be that you can't remember the name of it, and that's okay because that would be a pricing strategy. Another one that's there but not necessarily on the screen would be if you could remember the name, you can remember the name of quality control, but you know that the quality is tested after the product has been made, then just write that. Same with quality assurance. If you get the two mixed up, but you know the two, just describe them. Unless, of course, you're asked to identify them and you can't remember the names. That's because it's asked for you to identify them rather than describe them. Now, the next top tip in the exam is to qualify your answers. There are some answers which automatically need a little bit more detail to get the marks. So I talk about qualifying your answers, or they need qualified or compared to something else. So these ones, like expensive, cheap, quick, fast, time-consuming, and easy, they're too simple for the National 5. You have to say why something is the case. Now, we're not asking you to explain those answers. That's not what we're talking about. We're just asking you to clarify them a wee bit further. So, for example, it is expensive because of. It is expensive compared to. So say, for example, training. Training is expensive because of the course, or you have to pay for a trainer. Field research is expensive compared to desk research, so it has to qualify it that way. And again, expensive and cheap, they're the opposites, so you need to qualify them cheap, due to, or cheaper than. It's the same with fast and quick. you have to qualify it. So say why it's quick or why it's fast or why it's slow. So it's time consuming to gather. Easy because of. To give you another example there, e.g., the external recruitment is expensive as job adverts have to be placed. Or TV adverts are expensive to make and produce. It's too simple at National 5 level just to say that it's expensive. So just really watch out for that in your answers. Now, another top tip, if you struggle for answers, so say for example something comes up and you haven't got a clue what you're talking about, right? And it's a discuss question. I know it's not ideal, but if you think topics, then it might spark your memory into an answer. So what I mean by topics, I mean you can always talk about time, the time something takes, whether it's time consuming to gather or whether it's time efficient. You can always talk about the objectives of the organisation. An advantage of something might mean that it can lead to growth, or it could lead to a business becoming market leader. Often you can talk about profits. You can talk about the image of an organisation, whether they have a good reputation or bad reputation, or striking, for example, may negatively affect the image. You can always talk about costs, how something is expensive due to, or sales. You can always talk about sales increasing or decreasing. Now, it might be useful to write that down on your exam paper just to help you. That's just in case your mind goes blank on discussed questions or explain questions or justify questions. Look at topics to help, and if you remember that, then it might help you out. Okay, the next thing is from the case study questions. You've got 2 case studies to answer in the exam. And when the questions say from the case study or using the case study, you must use the case study or you don't get the marks. Now, if it says could use or may use, then you can also draw on your own knowledge, but use the case study for inspiration. This is a good time to use your highlighter to look for clues. So you should be highlighting, circling your case study at this point. So we're going to do this question. From the case study, outline the steps HelloFresh is taking to be environmentally friendly. And that should be 3 marks. So again, this time we're looking to outline the steps. So we're not looking for one-word answers. We're looking for something more than a list, which we've gone over previously. So this is the final question that we will be doing today. And because it requires you a little bit extra time to read, that should take you approximately 5 minutes. Okay, and welcome back. So hopefully you can see me highlighting the case study or circling the case study. And I have highlighted some of the key things from the case study. So, and again, this time we're not looking for just one-word answers, we're looking for an outline. So from this, we have got that they have been environmentally friendly by pre-measuring the ingredients, reducing food, limiting its packaging, sourcing its food from local suppliers, stroke minimising its carbon footprint. All the boxes, brown bags and spice containers are recyclable. and they use compostable wool liners. So again, that's from the case study. It had to be that. So if you started to talk about something else, unfortunately, you would not get the mark. Okay, and finally, I'm going to go over some common mistakes that candidates make in the exam. So some of the mistakes that candidates make is getting similar topics mixed up. And there are quite a few topics that are very similar in the names. For example, sectors of industry versus sectors of the economy. And what I would suggest that you do is revise them together and try to memorize them at different pages of your book. And that often can help you remember the sectors of industry by sectors of the economy. So the sectors of industry are primary, secondary, tertiary. And the sectors of the economy are private, public and third. And the way that I always used to remember it would be industry. If you highlight ST, that leads you to secondary and tertiary. And then obviously if you put the primary in front of there. And the sectors of the economy, therefore, have to be private, public and third. Another common mistake are factors of production versus method of production, because they've both got the word production in it. Factors of production are your capital, enterprise, land and labour, or CEL acronym for short. And the methods of production are job, batch and flow. Okay, another common mistake that candidates will make, in particular with topics, is that they get mixed up between the interest, influence and impact of stakeholders. So what I suggest that you do is that you would revise this in a table so you can cover everything at the same time. So an interest is why they want the business to succeed. The influence is what action the stakeholder will take. And the impact is how it would affect the business. Sometimes it actually might ask you to explain the influence in which you would incorporate the impact. But sometimes it might ask you to explain the interest, in which means that you would take on board the influence. For example, employees want good wages, and if they don't get good wages, then it may affect the quality of the work, or they may go on strike. And the impact is that if they go on strike or affect the quality of their work, it may give the business a poor reputation. Now, as the final question today, what we're going to do is pause the video for 5 minutes and answer the question for 2 other stakeholders. Okay, so your answers have just concentrated on customers and owners. So customers want low prices, and if they don't get it, they'll go elsewhere. And the impact, if they go elsewhere, it will reduce the sales of the business. The owners and shareholders want good profit, and if they don't, they may have to withdraw investment or sell shares. This will impact on the business because it will affect the company's ability to grow. Now again, just to reinforce that it has to be obvious which stakeholder that you're talking about, so you really need to be naming the stakeholder. Okay, so that's us reached the end of today's session. And just to review what we have done, we have looked at the fact that it would be useful for you to bring a highlighter, a ruler and a calculator into the exam. For answer structure, Just remember that you're recommended to bullet point your answers to make it clear to yourself. We've looked at the command words, and make sure that you know how to structure these, and it is really important that you practice these because candidates still get them wrong come to the exam. Remember from the case study that you have to use the case study, and don't forget to qualify your answers. Okay, so thank you for listening, and the next steps will be breakdown topics for revision.